I woke up for what felt like the 100th time since yesterday. Every time I had closed my eyes, every time I managed to fall asleep, I relived the same moment. I'd hear the thud, and as hard as I tried, I couldn't stop myself from turning to see him laying there. As I opened my eyes, the haze from my mind was gone, and the gears in my head had been restored to their rightful working selves. I could see everything again, with the clarity that I had lacked since the day before I met Brass at the bunker. Longbow shifted in her sleep, pressing back into me warmly. Well, with what little warmth I could feel through the bandages that covered most of me. After we had come back inside, I collapsed on my mattress and just lay there as Longbow held me, eventually falling asleep sometime in the night. But the question that kept running through my mind was why? Why would she stay here now that she knows I'll just get her killed? Why doesn't she hate me more for what I did to Brass? Why doesn't she judge me? The lighting in above the garage floor kicked off, and the hum of the generator below came to a sputtering stop. I groaned and pulled myself to my hooves, feeling as Longbow hooked her forehoof around mine, yawning and opening her eyes slowly. "And where are you going?" Through the wariness in her voice, I could hear a deep concern for me, as well as love. It hurt to hear how much she liked me, knowing full well that I could never be the stallion she deserves. I gave her a soft smile. "Generator's down. Gotta change the spark battery." I spoke softly, feeling as she tugged on my leg in response. "Get Sky to do it, and come back to bed." She let go of me and turned over, burrowing herself down against the mattress with a deep, relaxed sigh. "It'll only take a minute, I promise." I replied in a whisper, hoofing at the edge of the mattress up to get to the latch. I bent down and tugged it open, walking down the stairs slowly, as my good eye drifted over the spot where I had found the letter. It seemed like a lifetime ago that I had found it, a forgotten era that I left too soon. I hoofed at the dead battery, hitting it a few times before it finally popped out of the mounting. I dug through the scrap on the floor, finally coming up with one that had 15% scrawled onto it, popping it into the mounting with little resistance. The generator spurred back to life, quickly reaching its normal thumping as I turned and trotted back up the stairs. "Backlash, may we speak? Alone, perhaps?" Isaac asked as he popped his head out from the kitchen. I looked over at Longbow, who had fallen back asleep on her own, before nodding to him. "Great. I'll meet you on the roof." He left the door to the kitchen open, disappearing inside as I trotted in. As much as my body had healed, it still hated me for wanting to pull myself up 2 more sets of stairs. Each step was a challenge, not only to maintain my balance, but to also try to ignore the pain that coursed as well. I reached the kitchen, spying Dr. Fitz sleeping next to Ripcord, who was looking decidedly better than when I'd left him. Sky and Carlotta were nowhere to be seen, but I assumed that they had their reasons to be gone. If I was in a better mood, I would have tried to make some joke about scolding her, about abandoning me this time. But I just didn't have it in me. Everything had been tough on all of us. And the worst thing is, we're not even done. Not until we inform the Rangers of Sherbert. I climbed the old staircase to the roof, and into the dimly lit morning, being met with a foggy air and a thick sheet of frost covering everything. I pushed the door closed behind me, as softly as I could before striding over to Isaac, who was sitting on one of the collapsed sections of brick, staring off into the morning fog. "The others, they tell me that you were in Red Wing for a while." He didn't even break his gaze as he spoke, a mix of hope and dread filling his words. "Did you learn anything about me while you were there?" "You still don't remember what happened?" I took a seat next to him, actually happy the frosty floor was icing my wounds. I learned how to access my core operating system. I found a backup on my personality made before I was, as the system put it, damaged." He sighed. His feelings of having few biological parts clearly saddened him. He thought he was a monster, hating the fact that he wasn't a real zebra. "Well, That's good, isn't it? I asked, looking over to him again, waiting for a response. This time he looked back. What if I'm evil? What if the reason I was damaged was because I hurt ponies? His eyes turned back out of the endless gray fog that was his ears, as his ears went flat. I don't want to become any more of a monster than I am. Isaac, I've seen what monsters look like, and I can tell you you aren't a monster. You're a zebra. Plain and simple. I scooted a brick along with my hoof, nervously debating if I should tell him what I found out. He had been herding ponies in his old life, and so had his sister. But doesn't he deserve to know? The answer to your original question is yes. I do know who you really are. He shuddered for a moment, taking in a deep breath before I continued. Your name is Zelos, and you had a sister named Zin. The two of you joined the program together, hiding out with a ghoul in the mine after the world ended. You and your sister were the mine's foremans, forcing ponies to work in dangerous conditions. His muzzle sank to a frown, a despondent look filling the rest of his expression. It was an accident that caused you to forget and run off. Zin wanted to look for you, but couldn't get permission to leave. Then, it is true that I was a monster before. He looked over to me. The red glow inside of his eyes was almost non-existent. So, what of my sister, Zin? Does she still work in the mine? I killed her. Being blunt was the only way to deal with this. She tried to kill me. I'm sorry. I see. The disappointment in his voice was hollow. It was a cruel task for me to have to tell him he had a sister, a connection to his past that I myself had silenced forever. He got to his hooves and looked to the frost-covered floor beneath them. I guess I'll take my leave and make my way to Friendship City. I'll find a way to pay you back for your kindness in helping me. No, you don't owe me anything. The caps I lost, saving his life, would be missed, but I don't want any pony else getting themselves killed over something they thought that they owed me. I don't want any pony else to die for me, like Brass did. I gave Isaac a quick grin. I'll come visit you when everything goes back to normal. Until then, take care, Backlash. He sprung forward, flinging himself over the edge of the roof and down to the 3-story streets in front of the garage. He gave a final nod up to me before galloping off into the fog, his quick hoofbeats echoing long after he had faded into the gray street. Yet another friend I've failed. You'll do nothing but get them all killed. My consciousness echoed through the back of my mind as the cold finally nipped at my coat under my bandages. My body locked as the wind let out a soft howl and picked up, making me shiver as I turned away from the ledge. What was I supposed to do? Everything asked of me at the last couple of months had been to do X thing, with zero explanation of how to get it done or what exactly it entails. I'm so sick of it. Once I was back in the kitchen, I turned and headed towards the bathroom. It had been a while since I'd been able to have a proper shower, and for being such a simple thing, I looked forward to it greatly. Unfortunately for me, it was some reason Notepad was sleeping in the tub. Did they pick him up in Red Wing? No matter. I'll deal with him later. I prodded him with my hoof. Just 5 more minutes, dear. He groggily spoke as he curled up tighter. Notepad, get up. I need the shower. I sighed, prodding him again. He frowned before turning his head to look at me with closed eyes. He nodded with a yawn, stretching out his hooves against the tub walls and finally standing up and stepping out from it. Sorry about that. Backlash. He yawned as he walked towards the door, taking his exit and shutting it behind him. As it clicked shut, I hoofed at the hot water handle, listening to the century-old pipes shaking and groaning. I stuck my hoof in the tub, hoofing the drain plug so it could soak if I chose to. The mildly irradiated tainted water sprayed down into the tub, assaulting the old porcelain mercifully, before steam drifted into the basin. Sitting down, I hoofed at the bandages wrapping around the left half of my head, slowly removing them first before moving on to the wrappings around my body. The most distressing thing I found was that even with the wrappings off my head, I couldn't see out of my left eye. I stopped myself and raised a hoof up to my face, tracing around the socket. Nothing. The eye was just gone. I did my best to ignore the knowledge of that, continuing to unwrap the bandages around me. The moment the burns on my side touched the air, I cringed, feeling as if I was being lit on fire all over again. The gears in my mind fed me the memory of just after Brass became a ghoul, Skyline's exact wordings and warnings about how Burns felt on contact with the air. My mind didn't stop there, as I remembered how he had gotten the better of Skyline when I took his helmet off. I couldn't help but smile at the thoughts, remarking how much I wouldn't give to be lost in them forever. As the rest of my bandages slipped away, so did the memory, leaving me to look my coat over. You stole his life. Whatever Dr. Fitz had given me, it hadn't completely healed me. My entire left side was a mottled mix of charred black fur, twisted lumps of flesh, and deep red open sores. Even my cutie mark hadn't been spared. The skin on my flank had been stripped away, and a mess of scarred tissue ran almost all the way down my rear leg. I winced as I climbed into the tub, the near scalding water pelting me while my hooves felt like I had just jumped into a boiling pot of water. As I sat down, my forehoof slipped, setting me splashing into the hot water and making my side explode in pain. The agony from my chest and the pooled water around my muzzle kicked the gears in my head to spin up again, throwing the memory of the first night we'd spent out of the home. The only reason Sky and I could hide from the Alicorns that night was because Brass was there. Without him anchoring us in that basement, they would have found us. He trusted you to protect him. I pushed myself from the water in the tub, letting the shower run over me again as the memory dripped away and through the recesses of my mind. I took in several deep breaths, feeling my lungs draw in the steam from the air. It's funny how the simple act of letting water run over you can calm and focus you. I mean, I know nothing about psychology or how the equine mind works, but something about it can even make the most wild of ponies stop and just relax. I hoofed the shower off and listened as the water dropped to a trickle, dripping down the bath below me. I closed my eyes and just sat, trying to clear my mind of everything, even if I felt lost as to what to do or where to go from here in my life. Right here, right now, there was nothing. Outside this bathroom, there was nothing. No family, no friends, no wasteland, or no overbearing evil weighing down all of pony kind. The only things that existed were me and the warmth that I basked in. The thump of ponies on the roof tore me from the serene state, thrusting me back into the real world. With a heavy sigh, I stepped from the tub, dripping heavily as I walked to the mirror. The gears in my head whirled back to life as the steam from the shower wafted about lazily, forcing the memory of the fire on the ship back to me. Brass had been willing to sacrifice his own well-being to save every pony, without hesitation or even a second thought. And now, because of you, he'll never have another thought again. As I sat and wiped the mirror clean with my hoof, the memory was wiped from my thoughts as well. I stared at the stallion in the mirror, looking at the stranger on the other side. His head had an almost comical split down the middle, with one half being pristine, the other a charred mess of scars. The most striking feature of him was the dark socket where a matching amber-colored eye had more than likely once sat. His mane was a melted mess, hanging limply over the twisted shape of a half-ear on the darker side of his head. There was a knock on the door behind him, the sound piercing my mind and sending the throbbing pain into it. The door swung open as Carlotta strode in, stopping as she caught my reflection in the mirror. I hope you don't mind, but I was going to take a shower. She forced herself to speak nervously, focusing on anything but the mirror with my face in it. The cold air from the kitchen made my heart pound again, my muscles tensing up as the cold hit my sides. Yeah, that's fine. Just give me a moment. I spoke softly, reaching a hoof for the mirror, hoping that we still had some generic form of aspirin or something for my headache. I opened the medicine cabinet, my one eye meeting with an object that sank my heart. I hoofed the red inhaler out in disbelief, shutting the cabinet with my other hoof. As the mirror shut with a click, I could see Skyline in the kitchen staring at me, guilt washing down her face as she rubbed her forehoof with her fetlock. I was about to say something when Carlotta snatched the drug in my hoof, stepping past me with her stone-cold killer expression on her face. You, me, outside, now! She instructed to Sky, who just nodded sadly, flapping her wings as effortlessly gliding herself back to the third floor. As Carlotta proceeded to lay on the Skyline about how disappointed she was, Dr. Fitz walked his way over to me, folding his bag of tools along with him. I see you're looking a lot better today, Backlash, he remarked as I stopped where I was, sitting onto the floor with a plop. There was little use in fighting it anymore. No amount of healing potions or Hydra could make me look any less of a monster now. And that thought spun the gears in my head, bringing back the conversation Brass and I had had when he thought that he was one. For as bad as things got, for as much as he went through, he never sank so far from hope that he didn't, himself, lose his way back. I have to believe that I can come back from this as well. If I can't, then what will I have gotten him killed for? The memory flashed away as Dr. Fitz focused a bright light in my eye, making me squint and shy away from it. Well, your body seems to be making a remarkable recovery for having been through what it has. He levitated his tools back into the bag before putting a hoof to my shoulder. Though, no amount of work I can do on your body can ever fix the pain your mind feels from what's happened. His words were soft and genuine, seeping through the cracks and deep into my mind. Backlash. What you and your friends have done for ponies in the last few months is incredible. There have been reports of entire cities across the wasteland banding together and fighting the gangs controlling them. The narcotics industry is crippled thanks to the devastation of the pool, and the alicorns have all but disappeared from sight. But was it worth the cost? I looked into his eyes, watching as he did his best to keep his expression the same. But even with only one eye, he still couldn't fool me. He couldn't muster the strength to lie as much as I could tell he wanted to. That's what I thought. I hugged him lightly, surprising him with the reaction. Backlash, just remember, it wasn't your fault. He pat me on the back a few times before I stepped away from him. None of what you've done has been for nothing. I'm just glad I could help you and the others. You were supposed to help Brass get home. I know, I lied, giving him a small smirk. I turned and headed out towards the garage, stopping at the lip of the top step as the gears in my head spat out something that had slipped my mind. It was my turn to return the kindness and help him. My only hope was that this gesture could make up for a small fraction of the amount of trouble my actions have caused him. Oh, before I forget again, I need to tell you about this supply cache Brass and I stumbled upon. I turned around, hoofing the kitchen door to shut it. You're going to need a thermal lance, but does Ten Pony have any room for a new auto dock or two? I slid the new capacitor control board in, pressing it until it snapped back into its mounting with a click. Skyline was lucky that the ceramic mounting absorbed most of the energy that hit her rifle when she was fighting back at the pool 2 weeks ago. Somebody must have overcharged their laser rifle to do this kind of damage, not to mention, they had to be pretty damn lucky to have hit Sky at all. I shut the access panel and bit down on my Allen wrench, tightening the screws down. Satisfied with my work, I rechecked that I had cleared the gun's ammo and turned it on. As expected, the capacitors whined to life, and the gun was once again ready for Sky's saddle. If anything, I'm glad my spare kills won't go to waste with only one eye. I looked up at the stairs to the kitchen as a thought ran through my head. Carlotta's been yelling at her for over an hour because of the dash I found in the cabinet, and I was getting worried she might lay into her too hard. I had so many questions I wanted her to answer. How long had she been using it again? Was it because I used it back at the pool? But the question I really wanted to know the answer to was, could I really blame her with all we'd been through? Liar, you said you were coming back to bed. Lambo yawned as she sat up. Sorry, I needed something to keep me busy. It's how I recover from Spocket, I said as I spat the wrench out onto my workbench. Can you do me a favor and grab my saddlebag for me? I bit down on the barrel of Sky's gun, setting it to the floor and out of the way. I heard it crash as the contents of my saddlebags were dumped onto the garage floor. One of the assorted bits inside slid noisily across the floor, coming to a rest against my hoof. Sorry, my magic's a little wonky this morning. She gave a light giggle, stopping suddenly as she joined me in looking at the object. It was the auto repair module I had taken from Lemon's armor. Where did you get that? I took it from Lemon because you needed it. I looked up at her, watching as she glared at me intensely. I noticed right off the bat that it wasn't a mean glare, but one of pride. You realize you're a goddess damn genius. She rose to her hooves and hugged me, all in one fluid motion. My body locked up with both shock and pain before she leaned back and kissed me quickly, making my cheeks burn red. All I need to do is fit that in, and wham! I've got my armor back! She let go and galloped off down to the garage door, flinging it open and taking a few steps out. Hey girls! Bring my armor over here! She screamed loud enough that the apocalypse had not occurred. The neighbors might have complained. Well, that is if they could overlook the one-story tall artificial pony driving robot stomping around the street. I shook my head with a smirk as the wind sucked the door closed, leaving me alone again. I looked over to my strewn saddlebag contents, my eyes stopping as I ran across the top of the pip buck. I was about to move on from it when I could have sworn I saw the damn thing flicker. Curious, I trotted over to it and poked with my hoof, the screen and buttons flashing to life for a moment before fading away. How do you still work? I asked in no point in particular, leaning down and attempting to pick it up in my muzzle. I was quite shocked when the exposed wiring, shocked me. Reflexively, I dropped it to the floor with a clutter. Fucking Pinkie Pie, that's how, I grumbled, kicking it towards my workbench roughly. It had survived more than a century, and as much punishment as I could throw at it, I'm sure it was still working. A couple kicks wasn't going to kill it. I sat in front of my workbench and used my forehose to lift it up, slowly getting to work on the Arcanotech device. After a few minutes, I had finally managed to pry the shielding off, gazing into the most interesting configuration of wiring, spell components, and arcane spell matrices I'd ever seen. Somebody in Stapletech must have either been a genius or a moron for setting this up this specific way. It's like they were planning on letting somebody like me work on this. Damn it, Pinky. Don't tell me you knew. I struck my hoof into the bench in anger, ignoring the spike of pain that shot through my leg. There's no way she could have set this all up. Pinky weirdness or not, I refuse to believe it. If she had, I swear to Celestia that if you knew what happened to Brass, I'll find you and make you pay, Pinky. I'm sorry. Willow spoke from behind me. I'll leave you alone. What? Oh, sorry, Willow. I spun around quickly, following her eyes as they darted from my mutilated face to the workbench behind me. The first thing I noticed was that she was darker in tone than when she'd been on the boat. No, not darker. More like less there. I was talking to myself. It wasn't directed at you. I did my best to present a comforting smile, unsure if I could even do that anymore with how I looked. Was there something you wanted to talk about? Yes, it's quite important. She averted her gaze from me completely, now looking off towards the door. When I passed the Alcorn on the ship, I could hear her again. I was her again. Her voice strained in horror. The experience, obviously not one she ever wanted to partake in again. As I could hear her, she looked into me. She could see the memories of me telling you my story. She knows who I am. She knows how much Tiger Lily means to me. She sounded on the verge of tears. I know she's going to try to kill her. We have to do something. And we will. I don't know how we will, but we will. I nodded as the gears in my head whirled to life, formulating exactly what I'd need to get the job done. Please, tell the others we're leaving at noon. Thank you, Backlash, but I need to tell you. I can't go with you. She looked at the floor, sinking into it slightly. When the goddess passed through me, she didn't just take my thoughts. She took part of me back. And now I can feel the rest of me slipping away, slowly, like an hourglass that I can't turn back. Then we have to find a way to stop it. I have no idea what exactly she was, or how to fix anything like what happened to her. Backlash, I'm sorry, but I can't let her put any pony at risk any longer. Her voice picked up, the force of a determination filling her words. I must return to her. I can keep her from terrorizing the wastelands using your mother's song, but I don't know how long it will last. I moved to speak, but she raised her hoof to silence me. It is a small way to atone for the pain and suffering I've caused Esther Pond. It is all I can offer. Please, tell Tiger that I'm sorry for what I did, that I wish I could take it all back. She gave me a soft smile as sorrow crept through her expression. Can you do that for me, Backlash? I nodded to her, watching as she turned and floated off towards the kitchen, disappearing through the wall. Yet another pony I'll never see again. I can't fail her, not with what she's willing to sacrifice for the wasteland. I need to be ready, so I need to get back to the task at hoof. My first priority is to protect the ponies of Futuria, and for that, I have to save and fix my pip buck. All right, you bastard. Let's make you whole again. It took 2.5 hours, one of my trusty leg braces, a single vacuum tube, 4 tubes of wonder glue, half a roll of duct tape, a spool, and a half of solder, a few spare spell components, a Y42 industrial fuse box, the only 2 Y42 fuses I've ever found in my life, and a tube of epoxy. But I got it done. The tore-up pip buck was a shadow of its former self. The dimly lit screen was now outshone by the vacuum tube sticking out of it. The exposed wiring on the side looped about messily, before leading to the blocky fuse box, jutting from the cracked housing. I looked it over, doing my best to ignore the glaring flaws in my hasty repair work. The only thing I hadn't managed to repair on this thing was the spell matrix controller. But I crafted my work around using the aforementioned fuse box. Each fuse slot was spliced directly into a different spell catalog, though that meant that with me only having 2 of the ultra-hard-to-find fuses, I could only access 2 given functions at any time. I figured that until I could get used to remembering to change them, the default placements would remain on SATs and inventory management. I figured that a weapon to help, or help with said weapon, might be a bit more important than the administrative processes or the radio for when, not if, we ran into trouble. I looked up just as Longbow opened the garage door, sliding in proudly wearing her silver power armor, levitating her helmet behind her. She came to a stop as she walked up around the Marauder, tossing her mane from her face as she flashed a smile. For a brief moment, I was back with her at the pool when I felt my heart jump. Even in her power armor, she was the most beautiful mare that I've ever known. Unfortunately, as they do, my thoughts started to drift. No, I will not let Longbow die. No pony else dies. I smacked myself hard across the muzzle. Are you all right? She asked, quickly trotting over to me and looking me over. Yes, just fighting with my own mind. I sighed. Just, what if I was silenced when the longbow put her hoof to my lips. "No more questions," she ordered me, standing up straight as if I were some recruit to the Steel Rangers. I nodded, and she looked relieved. "So, what's the plan?" "Willow says Futura needs our help. So, that's what we're gonna do." I could feel my ear nub twinge as I heard voices in the kitchen, seeming like Carlotta and Sky had returned from their arguments. As I thought this, the door swung open as Sky streaked down, slamming into me and taking me down to the floor with a thud. "Oh, Celestia, I'm sorry, please forgive me." She was nearly unintelligible as she pressed her face into my chest, grunting as I lifted up my head, looking up to Carlotta, who had hope-filled look in her eyes, giving me a small smirk that told me that there would be no more dashing for Skyline. Sky looked up with teary eyes. "Please don't hate me." How could I? I once again tried to give her a reassuring smile. "Sis, I love you. Nothing you can do will ever drive me away from you." I stroked my hoof through her mane softly, holding her close. "Not to mention with all the crap you've pulled." Carlotta rolled her eyes as she jested playfully. "Can it, Carlotta?" I fired back in a sing-songy way, sticking my tongue out at her playfully. She sighed and shook her head. "Really, Backlash? What are you, 4? She grumbled and tossed her arms across her chest while I chuckled. Skyline stepped back from me, looking past the scars and through my pain, seeing me for the pony I truly was. These were my friends, my family, and I wanted nothing more than to just see them happy. Which is what I was making what I had to tell them so much harder to do. If Brass was family to you, why did you get him killed? I'm sorry for what I've put you all through, and I know it's been tough, but we aren't done yet. The weight my mind was putting over me, over Brass, felt like it was going to steadily chip away at the already frail foundations of my mind. I just needed to keep myself together until I could stop the goddess from murdering every pony in Futura and get the Steel Rangers to stop Sherbert. Willow informed me that the goddess may be attacking the settlement of Futura soon. We need to help them. When do we leave? Skyline and Carlotta spoke up at the same moment, smirking and leaning against each other lovingly. They knew that this was going to be just jumping out of the proverbial frying pan, but they didn't hesitate. Just tell me what you need me to do. I felt his longbow pull her armored hoof to my shoulder. I gave a slight frown, watching as her muzzle slowly mirrored mine. I need you and Edie out there to get the Manhattan Steel Rangers and tell them about Sherbert. It could take them days to get out of their bunker, or to get to her bunker on Hoof. She wasn't happy with what I was saying, but I could tell she was holding her tongue in the knowledge that this was all too important to her. Once we've dealt with Futura, we'll meet you at the bunker. I looked up to the kitchen as I heard a rustling from within, seeing Ripcord push away past Sky and Carlotta. "Ah, Backlash, my good friend. Off on another... Dear Celestia, what happened to you?" He stopped as he reached the bottom of the stairway, taking a few moments to look over the various scars and injuries I'd acquired during his recovery period. "You look positively dreadful." "At least you're still alive, which is more than Brass has. I can assure you, Rip, I'm only feeling half as bad as I look." I caught Carlotta gesturing to make a remark, so I glared as best as I could at her with my injuries. Surprisingly, she stopped as a look of discomfort washed over her. "Well, I have just the thing to help with that eye of yours. Got it back in a day before I came down from the Enclave," he said with a note of delight in his voice, mercifully oblivious to everything that's gone on. He twisted about and patted his rump, as if not sure if it was real. "Drat, I'm terribly sorry. You must forgive me. It does seem that I've left my bags back at Red Lantern. No matter, I shall retrieve them for you shortly." I'm sorry, Rip, but the pool and Red Lantern, hell, the whole mountainside, it's gone. Blown to smithereens." After losing Brass, there wasn't any way I could muster up the feelings I should have had for what Ripcord has lost. That was his livelihood. But even so, it wasn't just the pool that was gone. It was every pony who'd worked there, innocent or not. The most important among them, though, had been Pallet Jack. I promised to get her to safety, and I had failed. I failed them all. Oh, I see. Well, even without my possessions, at the very least, I still have my health, he remarked in a surprisingly genuine, cheery tone. How could he have that level of optimism, even though he had just lost his entire livelihood? The gears in my mind turned, but failed to find anything to help. Now, it may seem like the odd request, but do you know any pony who would be looking to hire some pony like me? You know what, Rip? I want you to work for me. I spat out without thinking. Catching his Skyline looked about as stiff as a statue. A wide grin split his face as he squealed happily. Although, currently, you need to rest up before you start. Skyline's eyelids twitched in agitation. Our business was to her, was exactly that. Our business. But Ripcord was our friend, and some pony whose life I was responsible for ruining. So if any pony could be considered to work under us, he was my first choice. I'm not quite sure what to say past, I would be delighted to work for you. He trotted over to me and held out his hoof. I hoof-bumped him and returned a smile with my own. With all that sorted out, the next hour was spent by every pony getting things ready. Sky was giving Rip her own rendition of the new employee orientation, while Carlotta was organizing her weapons and ammo that we would bring with us. The longbow was busy cleaning out and maintaining her power armor, while I tinkered around with the Marauder. I had just finished replacing the dead spark batteries with the last supply when Dr. Fitz came over to see me. You know, there was a point last month when you told me that you were getting into these types of situations. Now it's almost as if you keep finding excuses to throw yourself into harm's way, just to spite me. He gave a half chuckle as he spoke. The weariness from everything sounded as if it was finally getting to him. Sorry, Doc. Safety of the wasteland and all being on the top of the line kinda overwrites what I said. I sighed out, checking the seal on the capacitor gasket with my hoof. There was a clunk beside me as something was set onto the engine compartment. I turned my head to look at it, finding a pair of machine pistols in holsters. One of them was a plain metal black. The other was a dull gray. The one thing they shared in common, though, was that both pistols had matching silver engravings along the sides of them that boldly wrote out N2O. The twins were a gift from a very special some pony. They kept me safe while I was a wandering physician before I got the job at 10 Pony. They should be more than adequate enough to help keep you alive. He looked up at the ceiling as he spoke, having to force the words as these guns were something he didn't want to part with. Before you say anything, no, you can't refuse. And yes, I want them back. Thank you. I pushed myself out from under the hood, turning and throwing myself around him as he stiffened up, not ready for a hug. I let go and took the holsters in my mouth, placing them into my saddlebags with great care. They'll be given back without a single scratch. I promise. I leaned back into the hood to continue my work. Backlash! Skyline shouted from behind me. I screamed and jumped from the sudden voice, slamming my head into the raised hood and bracing myself for the worst case of deja vu I'd ever experienced. I relaxed myself as the hood didn't slam down on my head. Instead, it was being held up by Dr. Fitz's magical grasp. I pulled my head from the car and took a step back, wincing as he let the hood go and it slammed down. Yes, Skyline. My irritation from the sudden shock clear as I spun around, only to be met with something heavy being draped over my head. I pulled it off with my hoof, looking down at the heavy fabric of an old light blue customized Robo Ink jumpsuit. No. I didn't care if I came off as a bastard, but there was no way she'd expect me to wear this. You know I can't use this. You can, and you will, she growled back. I know you haven't worn this since you were with Sprocket, but I can't have you getting shot up out there anymore, and we don't have anything else that you could protect yourself with, as well as this. I grumbled at that, the gears in my head reminding me of the 3 reasons I was going to wear it. 1, I knew full well that we in fact didn't have anything else, because with it heavy as it was, barding was not something I normally traded with. 2, was that the plates that were sewn in were some of the best equestrian steel that Caps could buy. And 3, was that I truly did not want to get shot anymore. I slipped the old outfit on with Skyline's help, having to call over Dr. Fitz when I realized that I had gained enough weight since then that the zipper couldn't close anymore. After a few moments of using his fabric alteration spell, it gave a satisfying zip and wrapped me in snugly in his protection. Brass could have learned to do that if you hadn't taken him with you. Heavy hoofsteps from the other side of the Marauder announced Longbow as she trotted up, stopping to look over me, her cheeks flushing lightly as I gave her a nervous smile. You look handsome in that, she squeaked out, her cheeks brightening up as I felt mine did the same. Her horn glowed as she levitated something purple over to me, tying it around my head to cover up my empty eye socket. I hope you don't mind, Skyline, but I think that the velvet dress you loaned me isn't ever going to be worn again after Bishop's Place. This at least makes use for part of it. Skyline fluttered and hovered over me, putting a hoof to her chin before nodding. You know, I think you're right. She canted her head as she smirked, a small bit of hope in her voice. He hasn't looked this respectable in years. I had barding to protect me, the pair of guns to defend me, my family to support me, the Marauder to carry me, and the innocent ponies in need of me. As much as I didn't want to be, and as much as I wish I had a choice, we were ready to leave. Just this one fight to get through, and then I can sit down and start to pay for all my sins. Simple as that. It's so funny how wrong I can be. Instead of being able to just zoom past ambushes like I'd intended the Marauder to do, it turns out that in the narrow Manhattan streets, the only thing that the pre-war vehicle managed to do was deliver them to us faster than ever. Knock down a few street lamps when you see them coming, and bam! Instant roadblocks. If they had only managed to get a few pot shots off at us, though, before Skyline and Carlotta outflanked them, so now it was just an all-out firefight. I had myself pressed up against the open door for cover, as some pony unloaded their submachine gun against it. I had one of the guns Dr. Fitz gave me in my muzzle, the other lay in the dirt, just past the door. For some reason, they were both listed as one item in the pip-buck, but equipping it had brought out both, dropping the other just out of my reach. I looked across the bench seat over to Longbow, who was standing out in the open, taking her time to pick off attackers while the rounds pinged harmlessly off of her cheater armor. Brass could have still had his, had you not wrecked it. I don't need this shit right now. I growled and poked my head up over the door and let loose a rapid clatter of 9mm rounds, at no point in particular. Even with the gun, I still wasn't helping do anything more than hopefully keep them pinned down. As the mag emptied, I dropped back down behind the door, just before the renewed thudding of more submachine gun fire slammed against it. I spit the empty gun onto the floor of the Marauder, trying to think of a way to get to the other one. Longbow let off one of her anti-machine rifle shots, silencing the fire against my door permanently. The report of Carlotta's battle saddle down the way we had come worried me. I guess we weren't the only ones who thought to outflank. But at least she might be able to stall them long enough that Longbow could use that cheat suit of hers to clear the roadblock. "Longbow!" I screamed out between a few shots, finally grabbing her attention. "Company from behind! Move the block and let's go!" She bolted forward towards the metal poles, firing a few more shots from her sniper rifle as she did so. I spun and hoofed the other twin pistol back behind the door. being rewarded for my haste with a rifle round struck the dirt where I had just been. I chomped down on the bit and climbed into the Marauder, shutting my door behind me as I did my best to squish under the dashboard to avoid fire. I pressed the accelerator down slowly, looking out for Longbow's still open door to judge the distance and speed, but I can't remember how far ahead the block was. Was it 25 feet or 30? A quick knock on the hood before Longbow strode around the door made me stop. "Good to go. Put the pedal down and I'll steer." Her helmet boomed, winning out over the ringing of gunfire. I slammed the pedal down and listened as the tires peeled off in the dirt of the roadway, screeching off as they gripped the old pavement underneath. The engine roared off as we took down the road. The dings and slaps of pot shots sounded off the old steel, mercifully stopping after a minute or so of driving. There was a hiss from above as Longbow removed her helmet. "Are you all right, Backlash?" she asked as she scooted herself back into the passenger seat. I pulled myself up from the floor and dropped the gun from my muzzle. "Yeah, I thought I'd need to remember to stay outside the city while driving." I sat down on the bench seat, looking out through the hole in the windshield used to sit in. Well, at least my barding would keep me warmer in the wind than wearing nothing. I really should have thought ahead that the windshield would have got shot out or damaged. Maybe I could get Tiger Lily to find me a new one, assuming we all weren't horribly murdered by the Alicorns when we got there. Carlotta and Skyline flared their wings as they flew down to us, gliding alongside my window as we continued down the street. Longbow leaned forward, clicked on the radio, and giving me a smile as she sat back in the seat. I'm glad to see that she adapted to riding in a car so quickly. "The news. Just in case you've been living under a rock, I'll start today's segment with a recap of the handiwork of the Wasteland Crusaders. Reports of the monumental explosion that ripped the pool asunder is still coming in, as it both caused the demise of the Pink Mare and, sadly, claimed the life of one of the Crusaders. The price Brass paid for 42's death was too high. Now, my little ponies, for more current affairs. Even though the scourge of the Pink Mare ended with the pool, there is still trouble in her wake. From Manhattan to Baltimore, reports of gang violence has risen, with infighting breaking out among the groups, as they are left with no guidance. More troubling news is that the small groups of Steel Rangers have been spotted overrunning areas on or near old supply bunkers. My advice is that if you see the Iron Ponies heading your way, to drop what you have and get your flanks out of there. Nothing they can take from you is worth your life." I hoofed the radio off with a sigh. "Turn left up ahead." Longbow pointed her hoof towards a twisted sign, so covered in graffiti that I swear the weight of the paint was what was finally bending it over. I knew the sign well. It used to be the only real sign pointing towards a pothole. I liked to do trade with them. They always dredged up the most interesting things from the river, but that was before an exceptionally violent gang massacred every pony living there. This gang was so hostile that they used to leave body parts or entrails as a ward to keep others away from their settlement. "You sure?" I asked, slowing down to a crawl as we approached the town. No ponies entered there in years, not since the Portal Massacre. "Why do you think the Rangers haven't cleaned up the mess?" She smiled and pointed down the long abandoned road. "One of Equestria's best-kept secrets is down that road. So, I know that you'll trust me when I tell you I have to blindfold you from here on out." "Hey, that wasn't the plan." Claudia slammed her talons on the doorframe and leaned in. "You were supposed to be dropped off, and we would continue on our merry way to save some innocent ponies." She had truly amazed me with those words. Just a few months ago, she told me she didn't care about anything outside of her contract, and now her genuine concern for the safety of innocents filled me with a feeling of hope that I had long forgotten about having. "Longbow, I refuse to be split up again. Either he doesn't go, or we all go." Skyline hoofed from beside Carlotta. "Not to mention, I've noticed how perceptive Backlash is. Do you really think blindfolding him will do any good?" "Fine. Drop your saddles somewhere and get in." She sighed and scooted over towards me, motioning for me to open the door and get out. She was tense, and a jittery nervousness flowed from her like nothing I'd ever seen. Bullets flying all around her, steadfast and strong. Going to HQ, as nervous as a Philly meeting DJ Pone 3 for the first time. Or, well, as nervous as I had been. She pried me with an armored hoof as I realized I probably should have done as she asked. Just relax, and let me do the talking. Skyline and Carlotta climbed into the back seat, Sky shutting the door with her with a slam. So much for the never riding in the Marauder. She tensed up as we started to turn, pulling off the old main road and into the decrepit path towards the old shipyards. I gave her a quick smile, trying to tell her I was proud of her, but all she did was glare at me until we bounced through a pair of potholes, making her cling to Carlotta for dear life. Come on, it ain't so bad, Sky. Carlotta cooed coolly down at a terrified mare burrowing into her side. Though I'm thinking we should do this more often, seeing as how I love having you this close. She wrapped her wing around Sky, giving her a small wink and a smirk. With the old warehouse in front of us, we turned right, now driving down a single-lane road that used to have the main gates to a portal. The gates had been torn out or otherwise removed, but the brown-orange stains the rusted fences left on the off-white walls of the buildings on either side still remained. Bam! Freeze, restrain, relax. Longbow whispered to herself, almost low enough that I couldn't hear her through my fucked-up ear. Bam, freeze, restrain, relax. She repeated it as she put her helmet back on, doing so as if to ward and away any evil spirits nearby. Why was she saying that? We reached the end of the road, now turning left to enter what used to be the town square. Rather unexpectedly, there wasn't a pony in sight. Crates of pre-war goods sat open and stacked neatly on our left, while there was a makeshift firing range and obstacle course on our right. Before us was a line of old military tents of various sizes, the old canvas flapping in the wind. Longbow drove us another 10 feet or so before turning the car off, still chanting to herself softly. There was a thud on the hood, drawing my attention to a small black cylinder, all too late that I realized it for what it was, when the crash-bang grenade went off, blinding me and turning my hearing into an all-too-familiar whine. I felt a stabbing pain hit me in the side, dropping me down to the seat before I felt it get tugged out from under me. No, wait. I was being dragged out of the car. As I regained feeling in my extremities, I felt some pony tying my hooves together with duct tape. The gears in my head spun, putting the events to what Longbow was muttering. My vision returned before my hearing, revealing the outline of a huge pony standing, holding a stick to my face. The more my sight improved, that assumption changed into a huge pony to power armor, and from a stick to a barrel of a grenade machine gun. Deja vu yet again. Maybe one of these days I can be introduced to the Rangers without being pulled out of the Marauder at gunpoint. To be honest, though, I'm kind of mad that I didn't see this coming. The armored pony standing above me looked up, standing still for a moment, before nodding and stripping the tape off my hooves. I was quite confused when he finished and just stood there holding a hoof down to me. I held out my hoof, feeling as he hooked it around mine, and pulled me up with little effort, giving me a pat on the shoulder and pointing me over towards where Longbow was standing. She smiled to me in a, "I'm sorry I didn't give you a heads up, please forgive me," kind of way, before turning to meet a unicorn who looked like he was maybe a few years older than me. The strangest thing about him was his extremely ornate power armor. Every single armor I'd seen in my life was exactly the same flat silver color, but this had all sorts of fancy gold ivory that looked like it was growing over his suit, almost shimmering in the midday light, in contrast to the dull palette around him. The ringing in my head dropped off fairly quickly, letting me hear again by the time I'd made it my way over to them. "And you say this wastelander can vouch for you?" The stallion spoke in a very authoritative, yet arrogant tone, his very words seeming to prop Longbow up at attention. He brushed his curly light green mane from his face, letting both his eyes look over to me, cringing slightly as he passed over my injuries. I don't know why, but I'd seen those amber eyes somewhere before. "And who is this primitive?" "You listen to the radio, buddy?" I asked, already knowing that this conversation was going to aggravate the shit out of me. He nodded, generally passing off the statement as nothing important. Good, because I'm the pony you keep hearing about. You know, the one who took down the pink mare. Backlash. That's not very polite. Please don't go off on him. Longbow pleaded from behind me. No, we don't have time to play nice. We were behind schedule as it is, so I took the liberty of ignoring what she was asking. You're the Crusader. Hardly believable. He scoffed, making my blood boil. He looked over to Longbow and shook his head. I expected more from a paladin of your merit. Detain this primitive and relieve them of their gear. You aren't steel rangers. You work set excuses for ponies, hiding amongst the ghosts of the old world in an attempt to save yourselves. I stomped at the ground in anger, listening as the heavy steps of power-armored ponies drew closer behind me. You want to know why I can say that? Because I've met a real steel ranger. To say that he was twice the unicorn you were would be too much of a kindness to you. He died having done more good for Equestria than your fucking rangers have in the last century. Oh, is that so? The first tone, other than boredom, came from the stallion's muzzle, sounding to me like he enjoyed me chastising him, which was probably due to the fact that being a superior officer meant no pony dared to do it. I would love to meet this stallion. What did you say his name was? Provided he is, in fact, real. Maybe I'll have him barred for duty for helping a pony like you. He was so full of himself. I couldn't be sure how he fit into all this hot air inside of his body. I was going to rip him to shreds. Backlash. Stop! Longbow commanded, fury growing in her voice. You don't want to do this! His name was Brass Tacks. I spat at him, trembling as I was about 3 seconds from trying to rip the smugness from his muzzle with my bare hooves. The mention of Brass's name flushed the color from his face, his back legs giving out as his expression went blank. He was alive. He trembled. Overwhelming guilt struck his eyes as he turned away from us slowly. There was a long pause when no one said anything. Even the light breeze had died down to nothing. He turned his head back as his voice choked back extreme sorrow. Paladin Longbow, please escort your friend to see the Elder down in the dry dock. Tell her that I'm sorry for the hold-up, and that I shall be there shortly. Yes, sir. Longbow's response was hesitant, her voice carrying great concern for him as she prodded my side thoroughly. Come on, let's go. I followed her across the open yard, heading towards a squat-looking building, maybe the size of a shack, with no more than just enough room to hold 2 ponies. As we approached, the door swung open on its own, a mechanical arm pushing out to reveal a brightly lit staircase leading down. The door started to swing shut as I took a step inside, pushing me through before it even closed and sealing with a hiss. Longbow stopped and looked over her shoulder at me, the anger in her eyes fading. Backlash, I'm sorry I yelled at you, and I realize that you had no idea. But maple syrup was Brass's father. Her eyes felt like they punched a hole in my chest and wrapped around my heart. He and Paperclip never got the consent to marry, though he was untouchable, being the elder's son. But when they discovered Paperclip was 2 months pregnant, the elder signed the transfer orders himself. He's been stationed in Philly ever since. Every pony was to keep his identity from Brass until he was older, to keep the other foals from treating him differently. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I couldn't do anything anymore without destroying some pony's life. He had probably already buried Brass when he failed to return to the MOM, but I had just destroyed his life all over again. I know. These aren't normal wasteland ponies here. When you live on a Steel Ranger's base, every pony's family. The loss of a ranger is felt by all, but it's harder for those in command. You weren't the only one hurt when... Longbow choked up for a second, turning her face to me, looking up to me with painfully pleading eyes. Please, promise me that while we're here, you'll listen to my advice. I know things aren't going to go as planned, but if you want the Rangers' help to stop Sherbert, then we need to do this my way. Brass deserves to know his father, but you stole that from him. I nodded. We both took a moment to compose ourselves, trying to push the pain that we felt back into our minds. I followed her down, thinking to myself. After a few flights, I could feel warm air rushing up from below us, the sound of metalwork and heavy machinery echoing up as well. We reached the bottom of the 8th flight, stopping in front of a set of heavy double doors. The air that whistled through the gap beneath it carried with it the smells of melting metal and putrid oils. I tried to put my hoof out to push it open when Longbow put her own hoof out to stop me. What you're about to see is the closest guarded secret that the Manhattan Rangers have. What you see and hear does not get outside this base. Got that? She prodded my chest again for emphasis. Not to mention my mother is in charge of her, so don't think it wouldn't hurt me if you did say something. She didn't even wait for me to respond for pushing the doors open. The room beyond was massive, towering nearly 60 feet up, as well as stretching nearly 1,000 feet long. The centerpiece of the cavern was enormous. Sleek black tubes sitting on struts. A shape was like that of a cigar, and only something I had seen once before in a single photo before the war. Bright white letters were emblazoned across the monolith that jutted out from the middle of the object, giving it a name. HMS Nautilus SSN 571. There was a myriad of ponies busily working along the outside of the craft, some scraping barnacles and others sea junk off of it. Others were welding and hammering out the dents and divots that lined the hull. Yep, she was the first submarine of her kind, powered by one of the first generation of spark reactors ever developed. The Nautilus could cruise below the waves for more than 4 months before coming back in her prime. Longbow trotted towards the ship, her voice trailing off in my awe. I had forgotten to leave the stairwell. I hurriedly cantered over to her as to not miss anything she was about to say about the incredible machine. Normally, crewed by 100, we had managed to refit her with smaller spell matrix circuits, allowing her to require us only a crew of 30. The Rangers found her sitting here 50 or so years ago, wrapped up and sealed. The records stated that she was obsolete and was to be decommissioned, but it looked like the world ended before they could do it. She was masking the sorrow she was feeling by hiding behind the facade of enthusiasm, the words sounding more like a lecture she had been taught than just idly repeating for the sake of repeating it. Their mistake was our gain. She served me well for the last 2 years. The voice of an old mare yelled out from above us. A small crane lowered a basket from the rafters, dropping the fancifully dressed mare next to us. She had a light blue coat with a ghostly white mane. Crow's feet adorned the corners of her lavender eyes, with the combination of the navy formal wear she wore gave her the look of a seasoned admiral from the olden days. It's good to see you again, Longbow. I had no idea you were in the area. Did you have business to attend to? Or just want to stop by and spend some time with your dear old mother? Mama looked up at me with apprehension in her eyes. Business, Mom. We have to talk about Lemon.